put your phone or device aside and immerse yourself in this audio story. Perfect for listening on the move, while relaxing, or for bedtime listening. We release new stories daily, so make sure to like and subscribe to not miss out. This story is based on true events. The woman who sold blood. That didn't exist. In a Silicon Valley boardroom, behind locked doors and signed NDAs, a young woman with pale blue eyes made a promise that would change medicine forever, or destroy it. She wore black turtlenecks like a uniform of genius. She spoke in an unnaturally deep voice that seemed rehearsed for authority, and she convinced the most powerful men in America to bet everything on a medical revolution that never existed. By the time anyone asked to see what was inside the machines, billions had vanished, patients had received false diagnoses, and the most celebrated startup in history was revealed as the most elaborate lie. This is the dark business story of Theranos, where fake medicine met real money, and the cost was measured in broken lives. Elizabeth Holmes was 19 when she decided blood testing was broken. Traditional labs required vials of blood drawn from veins, painful, slow, expensive. She imagined a different world, a single drop of blood from a finger prick, analyzed instantly by a small machine, running hundreds of tests at once. Revolutionary, life-saving, profitable beyond measure. There was only one problem. It was scientifically impossible with existing technology. But impossibility had never stopped a billionaire secret from being sold. She dropped out of Stanford in 2003, using her tuition money to found Theranos, a fusion of therapy and diagnosis. The pitch was seductive. Democratize healthcare, make testing accessible to everyone, catch diseases early when they're still treatable. Who could argue with saving lives? Holmes understood something fundamental about wealth and power. You don't sell technology, you sell vision. And her vision was wrapped in moral urgency. She told investors her motivation was personal. An uncle who died of cancer that might have been caught earlier with better testing. Whether the story was true didn't matter. It worked. Silicon Valley fell in love. By 2004, she'd raised $6 million. Not from healthcare experts, they asked too many questions, but from venture capitalists dazzled by her Steve Jobs imitation and her relentless confidence. Tim Draper, one of the Valley's most prominent investors, wrote her a check. Then came Larry Ellison, founder of Oracle. Then Rupert Murdoch, the media titan. Then the Walton family, the heirs of Walmart. By 2010, Theranos had raised over $90 million, and not a single investor had ever seen the technology actually work. This was the genius of the deception. Holmes understood that in Silicon Valley, secrecy equals innovation. She claimed the technology was so revolutionary, so vulnerable to theft, that it had to be protected like a nuclear weapon. The company operated in what employees called stealth mode. Different teams worked in isolation, forbidden from communicating. The laboratories had keycard access and blacked-out windows. Investors who asked for demonstrations were told the devices were too delicate to transport, or that showing them would violate trade secrets. The more she refused to show, the more valuable it seemed. Scarcity breeds desire. Mystery breeds belief. But inside Theranos, the engineers knew the truth. The devices didn't work. The finger prick samples were too small to analyze accurately. The blood would clot or hemolyze before reaching the testing chamber. The results were wildly inconsistent. The same sample tested twice would produce completely different readings. Holmes's response wasn't to fix the science. It was to hide the failures and accelerate the illusion. She hired Sunny Balwani, a former software executive 19 years her senior, as her second-in-command and secret boyfriend. Together, they built a culture of fear. Employees who questioned the technology were fired immediately. Those who remained were forced to sign suffocating NDAs and monitored constantly. Balwani would explode in rage at engineers who admitted problems, calling them stupid, incompetent, disloyal. The message was clear. You either believe in the vision, or you're gone. Dozens of employees quit. Some tried to blow the whistle. Theranos responded with lawyers. David Boies, one of America's most feared attorneys, threatened legal destruction against anyone who spoke. The corporate scandal was being buried in real time, enforced by wealth and legal intimidation. Meanwhile, the public story was pure magic. In 2013, Theranos partnered with Walgreens to install wellness centers inside drugstores across America. Customers could walk in, prick their finger, and receive test results within hours. The press went wild. Holmes appeared on magazine covers, Forbes, Fortune, Inc. She was called the next Steve Jobs, the youngest self-made female billionaire in history. President Obama appointed her as a U.S. ambassador for global entrepreneurship. Vice President Joe Biden toured the Theranos labs, calling it inspiring. Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, former secretaries of state, joined the board of directors. Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Elizabeth Holmes's personal stake was worth $4.5 billion. And none of it was real. But something was happening in the shadows that Holmes couldn't control. People were getting hurt. Real patients. Real bodies. Real consequences. Because while Theranos was pretending its devices worked, the company was secretly running most tests on traditional machines, purchased from other manufacturers. Machines they modified and manipulated to process the tiny finger prick samples they weren't designed for. The results were catastrophically unreliable. A woman was told she was having a miscarriage when she wasn't. Another received blood clotting results, so inaccurate she could have died from internal bleeding. Patients were being diagnosed with diseases they didn't have, or cleared for diseases they did, and Theranos knew. Internal emails later revealed that Holmes and Balwani were aware of the accuracy problems as early as 2013. They were warned by their own lab directors that the error rates were unacceptable. Their response was to suppress the data, silence the whistleblowers, and keep expanding. This wasn't just fraud. It was medical negligence disguised as innovation, and the business model depended on no one finding out. The financial mystery deepened. How do you maintain a $9 billion valuation when the core product doesn't function? The answer is theater. When investors or partners demanded demonstrations, Theranos staged elaborate deceptions. They'd show the sleek miniaturized device called the Edison, but it would be running pre-recorded results or fake blood samples spiked to produce correct readings. When Walgreens executives visited the labs, Theranos employees were instructed to create the appearance of a functioning operation, moving equipment around, pretending to run tests, generating fake activity. The company even designed a proprietary device casing, beautiful, futuristic, glowing with LEDs, while the actual analysis happened offstage using standard machines. It was money and greed dressed up as science. The more fake it became, the more investment it attracted. One man refused to play along. Tyler Schultz, grandson of board member George Schultz, was hired as a Theranos lab associate in 2013. Fresh out of Stanford, idealistic, he believed in the mission. Then he started running quality control tests. The results were wildly inconsistent. He raised concerns to his supervisors. He was told to stop asking questions. He went directly to Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani. They dismissed him as inexperienced and disloyal. So he quit. Then he did something dangerous. He contacted a reporter. John Carreyrou, an investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal, had been hearing whispers. Former employees, concerned doctors, lab directors who'd been fired for raising alarms. He began digging, and what he found was a business crime hidden behind billionaire secrets and political connections. Carreyrou discovered that Theranos was running most tests on traditional machines, not their proprietary technology. He found proficiency testing data showing failure rates far above acceptable medical standards. He found patients who'd been harmed, and when he reached out to Theranos for comment, the company unleashed hell. David Boies didn't just threaten Carreyrou, he threatened the Wall Street Journal itself. Letters warning of defamation lawsuits, demands to see all evidence before publication, attempts to intimidate sources into silence. Theranos hired private investigators to follow Tyler Schultz. They contacted his friends and family, trying to pressure him into recanting. His own grandfather, George Schultz, former Secretary of State, one of America's most respected statesmen, sided with Elizabeth Holmes. He believed her over his own grandson. That's how deep the deception ran. Wealth and power had built a reality distortion field so strong, it fractured families. On October 15, 2015, Carreyrou published his investigation. The headline was devastating. Hot startup Theranos has struggled with its blood test technology. The article exposed the gap between the company's claims and its reality. The modified machines, the inaccurate results, the silenced whistleblowers. Holmes went on television to defend herself, appearing on CNBC's Mad Money with Jim Cramer. She called the article false tabloid journalism, an attack on innovation. She maintained her unnatural baritone voice, her unblinking eye contact, her Steve Jobs costume. But the mask was cracking. Because what came next wasn't just a corporate scandal, it was a systematic unraveling of one of the most elaborate corporate frauds in American history. And the deeper investigators dug, the darker it became. In January 2016, federal regulators raided Theranos laboratories. What they found was catastrophic. The Newark, California lab was cited for deficiencies so severe they posed immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services found that Theranos had been running tests on uncleared devices, failing quality control checks, and producing unreliable results for over 2 years. The FDA sent warning letters. Walgreens terminated the partnership. Investors began demanding their money back. And then the lawsuits started. Patients who'd received false results sued for negligence. Partner companies sued for fraud. Investors sued for misrepresentation. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched a formal investigation into whether Theranos had lied to investors about its technology, revenue, and partnerships. What they uncovered was a business documentary of deception that spanned every level of the company. Financial projections that bore no relationship to reality. Revenue figures inflated by counting hypothetical future contracts as current income. Technology demonstrations that were literally faked with preloaded results. And all of it authorized from the top. By 2016, the $9 billion company was worth nothing. Forbes, which had once celebrated Holmes as the youngest self-made female billionaire, revised her net worth to zero. Not millions. Zero. Because her fortune had always been built on lies. Theranos laid off hundreds of employees. It shuttered its labs. It voided 2 years' worth of blood test results, admitting they were unreliable. Imagine being a patient who made a medical decision based on those tests. A surgery you didn't need. A disease you didn't have. A cancer you did have, but were told you didn't. That's the real cost of this business crime. In June 2018, a federal grand jury indicted Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The charges were sweeping. They had defrauded investors out of hundreds of millions of dollars. They had defrauded doctors and patients by providing false blood test results. They had lied about the company's technology, its financial performance, and its relationships with pharmaceutical companies and the military. Each count carried a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. The trial wouldn't begin for 3 more years, delayed by legal maneuvering, the COVID pandemic, and Holmes's pregnancy. But the foundation of the case was ironclad. During those years, something strange happened to Elizabeth Holmes. The deep voice disappeared. She started speaking in a higher, softer register. The voice, it turned out, had been fake all along, another costume piece to project authority. She claimed she'd been abused by Sunny Balwani, manipulated and controlled, that she was a victim too. She got married to a wealthy hotel heir. She had a child. And when her trial finally began in September 2021, she arrived at the courthouse each day, looking nothing like the black turtleneck icon of Silicon Valley. Now she appeared demure, vulnerable, feminine. But the prosecution's case wasn't built on her appearance. It was built on documents, emails, testimony from whistleblowers, and the undeniable evidence of harm. The trial lasted 4 months. Witnesses described a culture of deception. Former Theranos lab directors testified that they'd been ordered to hide problems from regulators. Investors testified they'd been shown fake demonstrations. Patients testified they'd received results that could have killed them. Holmes took the stand in her own defense, a risky move, and claimed she'd believed the technology would work, that she'd been deceived by her own employees and by Balwani. She cried. She claimed abuse, but the jury didn't buy it. On January 3, 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of fraud against investors. She was acquitted on charges related to defrauding patients, not because she didn't do it, but because the prosecution's burden of proof on those specific charges wasn't met to the jury's satisfaction. Still, the convictions were historic. A Silicon Valley founder, once valued in the billions, had been found criminally liable for lying to the people who funded her vision. In November 2022, she was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. Sunny Balwani was tried separately, convicted on all 12 counts against him, and sentenced to nearly 13 years. The total financial damage remains difficult to calculate precisely. Investors lost approximately $750 million. Walgreens lost $140 million in its partnership. Safeway, which had redesigned stores for Theranos clinics, lost $350 million. Legal fees, regulatory fines, settlements, the losses cascade outward. But the human cost is harder to quantify. How do you measure the impact of a false cancer diagnosis? The psychological trauma of being told you're sick when you're not, or healthy when you're dying. The shattered careers of employees who tried to tell the truth. Tyler Schultz spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees defending himself against Theranos' intimidation. He was vindicated, but the damage was done. His grandfather, George, never fully reconciled with him before his death in 2021. So what did we learn from this real-life business story? That charisma is not competence. That secrecy, when used to hide failure rather than protect innovation, is a warning sign that the most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in moral urgency. Who could question someone trying to save lives? Theranos succeeded because it told investors what they wanted to hear, that disruption was always good, that conventional wisdom was always wrong, that belief could override evidence. Silicon Valley had created a culture where fake it till you make it was celebrated as entrepreneurship. Holmes just took it further than anyone else, into medicine, where faking it meant people could die. The rise and fall revealed something darker about wealth and power in America. The same political and business elite who celebrated Holmes, who gave her awards, board seats, magazine covers, were protected from the consequences of their credulity. Henry Kissinger and George Shultz faced no accountability for lending their names to fraud. The venture capitalists who funded Theranos without proper due diligence simply wrote off the losses and moved on to the next deal. The only people who truly paid were the employees who told the truth and the patients who trusted the tests. That's the asymmetry of consequences in corporate scandals. The architects walk away. The believers suffer. Theranos also exposed the limits of innovation mythology. Silicon Valley had convinced itself that every industry could be disrupted by smart people in a garage with venture funding. But healthcare isn't like social media. You can't beta test blood diagnostics on real patients and iterate later. The move fast and break things ethos, which worked for software, was catastrophic when applied to medicine. There are domains where regulation exists for good reasons, where expertise matters, where shortcuts kill. Holmes's crime wasn't just fraud. It was the arrogance of believing that confidence and capital could override biological reality. In May 2023, Elizabeth Holmes reported to federal prison in Bryan, Texas. She's eligible for release in 2032. Theranos no longer exists. The company dissolved in 2018. Its assets liquidated, its technology abandoned. The Edison devices, those beautiful glowing machines that never worked, are now museum pieces and cautionary tales. But the lessons remain urgent. Because for every Theranos exposed, there are others still operating. Startups running on hype instead of results. Founders lying to investors. Products that don't work being sold to people who trust them. The machinery of deception hasn't stopped. It's just gotten better at hiding. What makes the Theranos story truly chilling isn't just the scale of the fraud. It's how close it came to succeeding permanently. If Tyler Schultz had stayed silent, if John Carreyrou had been intimidated into dropping his investigation, if the regulatory agencies had been slower to act, Theranos could have expanded nationwide, running millions of unreliable tests, harming countless patients, all while Elizabeth Holmes collected billions, and Silicon Valley celebrated her as a visionary. The system didn't protect us. A handful of whistleblowers and one persistent journalist did. That's the real business scandal. How fragile the safeguards are. How much we depend on individuals willing to risk everything to tell the truth. And perhaps the darkest lesson is this: it will happen again, because the incentives haven't changed. Venture capital still rewards growth over profitability. Founders are still celebrated for confidence over competence. Secrecy is still mistaken for genius. And the distance between a visionary and a con artist is often just whether the technology eventually works. Elizabeth Holmes bet everything that she could make the impossible possible before anyone discovered she was lying. She lost, but someone, somewhere, is making the same bet right now, and they're counting on you not to notice until it's too late. In that locked boardroom where it all began, behind those NDAs and promises, Elizabeth Holmes made a choice, not to revolutionize medicine, but to fake it, to raise the money first and hope the science would follow, to believe that reality could be bent by force of will and media coverage. She was wrong, but she almost got away with it. And that should terrify you more than the fraud itself, because fake money and fake medicine and real billions lost, that wasn't a glitch in the system. It was the system working exactly as designed, until someone decided to stop it. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.